The swords have been gathered, and it's time for the Tournament of Champions. Mutants of Krakoa versus Mutants of Arakko by way of the demonic realm of Amenth. X of Swords, or 10 of Swords Stasis, is the middle oversized 11th chapter in X-Men 10 of Swords, delivering fully on two of the larger information gaps in the X-Men event, and including a final page reveal that answers one of the event's biggest questions. Today I'll answer: what do we learn about the swordbearers of Arakko, the X-Men's antagonists? What do we know about the Kingdoms of New Otherworld? How did I get so good at precogging X-Men reveals and theories and predictions for what's to come in this very, very intriguing X-Men event? Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of Comic Book Herald. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or Krakin Krakoa, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. You're listening to Krakin Krakoa number 108. Spoilers for Discuss Comics, especially the entire 10 of Swords event, will follow. Writer Jonathan Hickman and Tini Howard, artists Mahmoud Asrar and Pepe Larraz, colors by Marte Gracia, and letters by Clayton Cowles. The core of Stasis focuses on the Arakkan swordbearers, the 10 champions the X-Men expect to face in battle, and how they've arrived in preparation for Saturnine's grand game in Otherworld. Perhaps, or per my perhaps impatient request after X-Men number 13, regardless of what Saturnine tells Apocalypse later in this issue, I am certainly not too old to be impatient. Hickman and Howard and the team lean into exploring the Arakkan mutants in a lot more detail, and non-mutants, as it turns out, to give us some smaller clues and details about the foes the X-Men are facing in this so far cordial battle to the final death. Artistically, there continue to be moments of brilliance, and I'm in love with the character designs, but the art feels more rushed in Stasis. I keep noticing missing details on faces, these horrific eyeless, featureless blurs that detract from absolutely sucking readers into the event like Larraz and Asrar's best work does across the X world. When it hits, though, it's definitely excellent. The swordbearers of Arakko are given prophecies for each of their swords and swordbearers, much like our Krakoan X-Men units, and we get to see those prophecies in this issue. Nothing stands out quite as successfully as Pog Your Pogs, which made me so delusionally happy I literally slapped my knee and said, "Man, oh man," out loud, like a lunatic sitting alone in my Dave cave. While we don't really know enough about these characters to project too much from the prophecy, the remainder of the section explores one page, visits with each of the swordbearers. Since we're learning about these characters for the first time in many cases, or have only seen them introduced over the last few weeks, I'm keen to do a little swordbearer accounting to get a feel for these threats the X-Men are facing. Let's talk a little bit about who are the swordbearers of Arakko and what do we actually know, if we know much at all. The first swordbearer is Redroot, the Forest. Her sword is Alluvium. We see that Arakko just wants reunification in this scene with Summoner, which is very interesting, shedding tears over the absence of Krakoa, the split and missing other half. And we also get Redroot established here as basically Arakko's Doug, right? Like Doug Ramsey, she can communicate with Arakko. Redroot is a pure-blood mutant reclaimed from Amenth, one of only two Amenth natives on the side of the Blades of Arakko, and the only character known to be called out as pureblood, which is an interesting point to make, again, given that like the mutants of Okara presumably come from mutant heritage, but that it's specified here she is specifically pureblood for some reason, I imagine. I'm already into Redroot for calling Summoner out immediately on his lying ways, and like Doug Ramsey on the Krakoa side, for at least seemingly showing serious interest in reuniting Krakoa and Arakko. That seems to be something that she is fighting for, which is great. Number 2, let's go back to Summoner. What do we know about Summoner? We've seen the most of Summoner dating back to X-Men number 2, although now we of course know that Apocalypse's grandchild, the Son of War, is a lying liar who lies out of his lie face. Oh, and he's also a high summoner trained in the art of raising demons of Amenth. Given his cleaving of Rockslide and in the Creation number 1 one-shot that kicked this off, in Death by Otherworld, I really have no greater investment in a swordbearer of Arakko losing than I do with Summoner, although I expect that will be no small thing given his power set and given the sinister nature we have now seen of this character, but of course he is here as one of the Arakko champions as well. Number 3 on the list, Pog Your Pog. Pog is the highest approval rating of literally any character I've ever seen, and I think it actually went up with the Alligator/Dragon Warrior's first speaking appearance, revealing himself as a sellsword in love with treasure. Pog Your Pog is charmed, and so am I. Like Redroot, Pog is unique as a beast from Amenth, the only non-mutant of the Arakko clan to be a part of this tournament, a la Captain Avalon on Team Krakoa, at least as far as we know. Again, my theory that Jamie actually turned Brian Braddock into a mutant could change that. Pog is perfect, and I love him. And I'm genuinely concerned Magic is going to hurt Pog because it's going to be Magic v Pog per the teasers that Marvel has thrown out there. And not that I want Magic to lose per se, but I don't want to see Pog harmed. Number 4 on our list, the White Sword of the Ivory Spire. The legacy of the White Sword is one of the most interesting additions to the Arakko mutants, stemming from Summoner's accounting of what happened in Amenth as told to Apocalypse in X-Men number 12. We learned in that issue, and again, Summoner cannot be trusted, that the White Sword takes 100 warriors out to battle the demons of Amenth daily, heals, and then does it all again. In the beginning, this was the intent of protecting Arakko, but at this point, he seems to have succumbed to a warrior's madness, or so we are led to believe. The White Sword is interesting because he's still in the mode of protecting Arakko from Amenth and considers the Horsemen traitors for turning to Arakko. I'll also point out that the White Sword and the next 3 characters I'll cover are all listed as from Okara and not Arakko, meaning they are old enough to have originated from the One Land back when it was whole. Number 5, Iska the Unbeaten. No words on this page, which certainly seems deliberate. I feel like we'll be coming back to this scene potentially to maybe see some of what was said, although it's occurring to me it's a possibility, especially given some of the prophecies, that Iska might be mute. I find Iska even more captivating than the White Sword because so far all her dealings are shrouded in mystery and increasingly seems like the spoke at the center of these wheels. When we were told about Genesis, Apocalypse's wife, conversations with Iska upon her betrayal to Amenth, it's a mystery what was said. We still don't know. Iska's mutant power is that she cannot lose. So the fact that she recognized Amenth was going to ultimately achieve dominion over the Arakko resistance was essentially the death knell of that happy ending. Now I think we've seen a teaser that Iska is going to face Doug Ramsey actually in their first battle, which bodes horribly for Doug, although we'll talk a little bit about at the end of this about some theories about where good old Doug aka Cipher is going. Number 6, Death. The sword, the black bone of Amduit, which we see the character grab in this Stasis issue. I'll note again here too, so of the Children of Apocalypse, it's interesting that the full suite of the Children of Apocalypse, all 4 of them, the 4 horsemen, are not included among the number of swordbearers. War and Death are, but Pestilence and Famine are left out. Now, we see Pestilence and Famine are certainly involved in corralling the 10 swordbearers, but only 2 of the 4 are actually named to the battle, which is, again, kind of an interesting twist on this event that I wouldn't have expected. As far as what we know about War, we actually know more about War than Death. Death, basically, we just, cocksure attitude seems into death, as you might have it. But with War, we know a little bit about her, family life. And aside from standing as a horseman and child of Apocalypse, most of what we know from War comes from other characters, like Summoner, her son, and Solemn, her husband's murderer and likely lover, as we'll talk about here in a moment. But again, War has familial connections in a way and hostilities in a way that we really haven't seen from the other Children of Apocalypse, who again, we know their role as horsemen, but we don't necessarily know much more about them than that. Speaking of connections to Solemn, this character is only alluded to in the pages of Stasis, but of course we've seen Solemn established alongside Wolverine in the pages of Wolverine number 6 and X-Force number 13 chapters in the Ten of Swords event. Solemn's entwined in Arakko lore, having had an affair with Bracken, the husband of War, and father to Summoner, and then likely having murdered Bracken due to as yet unrevealed reasons. As a result, War hates Solemn, despite needing him for this tournament. I mean, the only reason War acquiesced to bring Solemn in is because Annihilation, basically said, you must do this. We must get these tournament bearers because this is the goal. My favorite theory about what Wolverine had to promise Solemn to get his Muramasa blade, which is how the two-parter of Wolverine and Solemn in Hell getting their Muramasa blades ended. There was a mystery of Solemn saying, all right, you're going to have to give me something. A fair amount of listeners and readers have said, oh, he probably just wanted to hook up with Wolverine. That would be kind of funny and fine. But my guess is it's something else. My guess is actually Solemn was ensuring he would have a place on Krakoa when this was all said and done if his side loses. He seems like a schemer. He seems like a planner. I think he was assuring and granting assurances from Wolverine, although I don't know that means he's gonna throw the fight with Wolverine. Although that would be interesting because again, there's no love lost between Solemn and many of the, again, the Children of Apocalypse and Annihilation. They're very much in opposition as characters. The other Arakan mutant that we have here is Bay the Blood Moon. Bay is the second entry listed specifically as a mutant from Arakko. Solemn's the only other, meaning the character was likely born there. We don't have much to go on here other than perhaps the most intriguing mutant power of the entire collection, which is the Doom Note. Now, I couldn't tell you what exactly that means as mutant powers go, like Bay the Blood Moon. All we really have based on this instance is a very good hunter and killed some sort of octopus Krakin creature in Amenth before, and basically just said yeah, I'm game to join this tournament, no problem, no questions asked, without summoner really even asking. Although I do hope that potentially the Doom Note could look a lot like this scene from Fantastic Four number 200, Doom Master Organ Player. We get a handy Blades of Arakko data page recap with much of the information I've been detailing. The standout here is, of course, the redacted entries for Annihilation, which more or less get resolved by Comic's End. I do find it intriguing that Annihilation's sword is now called the Midnight Blade, which is, of course, a progression from the Twilight Blade that tore Okara into two. In addition, from the ominous progression, moving from Twilight to Midnight indicates an even darker threat. The Midnight Blade is also a name Hickman has used before in the pages of his Fantastic Four run, which I had very much forgotten. I googled the name just to check, okay, is this a sword that we know in Marvel lore? And lo and behold, it is. Cal Blackbane is one of the Universal Inhumans, specifically a champion of the Inhumans Light Brigade. Blackbane wields a sword and gets the alias Midnight Blade in battle. Now, in this Fantastic Four run, this could just be the case of Hickman liking a name, again, it's been a decade since these comics came out, and using it again. And certainly we've seen that before, and Black Bolt was Hickman's Midnight King, so the language has some appeal to the creator. But there are more curious connections, honestly, that this could potentially mean more. For starters, Johnny Storm first meets Blackbane in the Light Brigade when he's a prisoner of Annihilus in the Negative Zone. The Light Brigade helps Johnny fight off Annihilus's hordes. Now, given the naming of Annihilation as the possessed helmet of Amenth, these connections seem too oddly notable to leave out. I mean, that's a pretty big coincidence that the helmet of Amenth that Annihilation is wearing is called Annihilation, and that the Midnight Blade would have been used by this Inhuman warrior in the Negative Zone. It's got me wondering, not necessarily that Annihilus is going to show up. I don't think we're going that route, but I wonder if there could be something with that dimension, with that realm connected to Amenth, right? With something there where something escaped from the Negative Zone to Amenth, and that could be what we're dealing with here, because otherwise the naming conventions, they really overlap a lot. It's a lot of coincidence, I think, to be spilling over into this Ten of Swords event. And the other crucial element that Stasis delivers on is the comic opens with glimpses into various kingdoms of Otherworld. We get our first real glimpse into the kingdoms as they gather for a parliament led by Saturnine. In an interview with Adventures in Poor Taste, Jordan D. White, X-Men editor, said, "Otherworld has changed in a big way. I would say it is not that Otherworld is now the British Isles divided in 10. I would say now Otherworld is 10 times bigger than it used to be, or infinitely more than that even. Everything that we have ever known as Otherworld pre-Secret Wars is reflected in what we are calling Avalon now, and the rest of Otherworld is completely never seen before. This book's opening gives us views into most of the fair and foul courts for the first time, including Mad Jim Jaspers in the Crooked Market, and the Fury, those superhero hunting nightmares in the Infury, the Everforge realm. I plan on a full dive into the history of Otherworld and the new Otherworld Hickman and Howard and company are creating in a separate video because there's a lot here, and per that Jordan D. White quote, this is a hugely changed realm and sort of alternate, and not an alternate, but a place that Marvel characters can go. And now that we finally have a bit more detail, that feels, increasingly achievable to talk about. One theory I'll be expounding there, and that dawned on me reading the Parliament of Otherworld Kingdoms in Stasis, though, is the mystery of Mercator. As I've said before, Mercator is the last name of an Omega-level mutant, Mr. M, and he's a possible leader of this kingdom. Another possibility, though, either connected or separate, is that this naming, which is also a famous 14th century cartographer, could be a nod and a wink to the map makers of Hickman's Avengers in the build to Secret Wars. Their presence on Otherworld would actually make a bit more sense than Mr. M, although frankly I'm quite into either answer or the two of them connected. But Secret Wars, it's Hickman's last thing before X-Men at Marvel, right? And there's been all these nods and winks to the impact that Secret Wars had on Otherworld specifically, shattering the Captain Britain Corps, basically putting Saturnine in this position of power, but also a somewhat position of weakness, having lost her core, right? It has these tentacles reaching forward even now, bringing back the map makers, which are like the builders, if you remember that from the Avengers run, and if you don't, check out the Otherworld vid I'm going to do, because I will talk about it in more detail there, but I think that could be a really fun connection to be had in that mystery realm. Once the Krakoan mutants arrive, I do feel clearer on Saturnine's game than I did previously, pitting Krakoa against Arakko. I think, as she views it, an Arakkan victory would essentially just cement them among her fair and foul courts of Otherworld, with all the kingdoms still fully under her nigh all-powerful thumb. Saturnine has nothing but animosity for the X-Men, outright disdain for Betsy Braddock, legitimate grievances with Apocalypse, who's been trying to invade her citadel, and not inaccurately calls Wolverine an awful little man. Her romantic overtures toward Brian Braddock are also more or less out the window following the events of Excalibur number 13, when he did a fake-out, make-out, literally, and they stole the Starlight Sword for Betsy Braddock. The issue's final reveal, the big one, is confirmation that Annihilation is in fact Genesis, which we precogged way back in our Ten of Swords prediction party, and yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. With the reveal, one question that occurs to me is why Apocalypse would stick with Krakoa now if given the option to rejoin his wife's side. This might be a harder sell, given his children's greeting was attempted death by stabbing, but if Genesis extended a hand for Apocalypse to join in her immortality, and of course survival of the fittest, what would be his deterrent? One thing that occurs to me, my best guess, is Annihilation's presence and the desire to protect all of mutant kind would be at odds, right? So Genesis, yes, it's his wife, but has she become something else now? She is now also the keeper and the wearer of the Annihilation helm, which has its own demonic influence. Again, it's got a very Dr. Fate vibe, where you have Nabu, this kind of god in the user's head, in the wearer's head, right? So maybe his wife isn't really who he thought he left behind. Again, I think this is really the only thing I can think of that would keep Apocalypse pretty firmly on Krakoa's side, saying all I care about is survival of mutant kind and immortality for mutant kind, as opposed to what might be, I don't know exactly what Annihilation's goals are, but they certainly seem like, conquering and wiping out kind of everything for these demon hordes of Amenth. So there's also here too, like, everything about this story is teasing a death for Apocalypse, and it might be time to give into Occam's razor and just say, like, yeah, that's where we're going. I'm not there yet, but we're moving in that direction. So, all right, at the end of this, we get a Tarot, the Mutant, reading of the new cards that Saturnine leaves for all of the Krakoan mutants. I'm not going to go through absolutely all of them, but I will talk about the ones that I found the most intriguing. First up, the Nine of Swords. This is given to Betsy Braddock. She's getting the only card that is outright described as bad, which doesn't seem like a great look. I'm a little worried about Betsy. I think she's fairly high on the, I think this character is going to die, pools that are going around right now in this event, and this card definitely doesn't help. One theory that I've either heard people talking about, or I'm combining some ideas that I've heard, is like, if Betsy gets it in this event, remember that it's final death, quote unquote, but remember, resurrection would also mean that it's a combination of all realities Betsy Braddock's, which in the case of Betsy would be like the Captain Britain Corps, repersonified in one individual. That would actually be really awesome, because the Captain Britain Corps is, you go across all of Marvel realities, and they each have a Captain Britain, right? That's what the Corps was initially. In this case, if Betsy dies and now she becomes all versions of Betsy's, and she is Captain Britain, now you've got all these alternate reality Captain Britons in one person. So assuming that could come back, as a sane individual, which I don't know that we've seen confirmed with Rockslide, I think that would be really, really fun. So she could get it, but in an interesting way. I think the Two of Cups here goes to Cipher. This one is definitely tying into predictions I've had previously, where Harmony and Bonds are concerned. This sure sounds like Doug, Warlock, and possibly Krakoa are going to merge as one. I think there's 2 or 3 likely outcomes, like basically just all the possible combinations. One is just Doug and Warlock totally merge. Maybe Warlock takes precedence given his visual on the New Mutants number 14 cover that follows this event. I think we've seen Doug and Krakoa merge in Powers of 10, or maybe all 3 of them merge. Maybe it's a 3-way merger and bonding. Good for them, right? Doug, Warlock, and Krakoa getting together. The other tease here that I really caught my eye was Death, which goes to Storm, says the season before can never come again. It's a metamorphosis. So again, like not predicting that this character is going to die. What does Storm have that she can transition to? Again, like Storm on a horse leading an army of the dead is the visual we get here. I'm really intrigued by this one. One thing that comes to mind is Storm leading like the necropolis in Wakanda. Again, like there's a city of the dead there, or there was, that was utilized pretty heavily in Hickman's work on New Avengers. Could this be a role for Storm to play? Could this be her defeating Death in battle in Amenth and then leading her own demon army in that realm? I'm very interested to see what's coming for Storm. I think, again, like there was a huge X-Men announcement that like, okay, 2021 is going to have a huge Storm event. Now, we've been kind of led to believe, and again, this is via Jordan D. White, the editor, in interviews, that's not going to like it's not going to happen yet. Like Storm's big thing isn't necessarily going to happen in Ten of Swords. Like it's going to be a bigger thing that comes later. But could this be paving the road for that? That's what makes me think potentially about Necropolis and Wakanda, because like all my theories for Storm's next big thing tie to Black Panther and the Wakanda mythos, which I think would be pretty cool. So, in conclusion, Stasis was a fulfilling issue in capturing two of the biggest story details I wanted to see fleshed out, Otherworld and the Swordbearers of Arakko, while delivering on one of the event's biggest teased mysteries. Given the economy of storytelling required to weave in this many new characters and places, I am somewhat in awe of how deeply invested I become in the Swordbearers of Arakko in particular. New threats are a dime a dozen in superhero comics, and yet the Blades of Arakko feel uniquely characterized and compelling. I want to see more of them, right? Like, I don't want them to go away after this event is done, because I want these characters to be around. So in that regard, I think it's successful. I think there's still a lot to learn about Otherworld and the dynamics there. I'm really curious to see more. What are the biggest questions you have? Or what do you think about some of the theories posted here? Let me know in the comments. I definitely want to hear from all of you what you thought of this issue, what your theories are, and what questions you might have moving forward. The Krakoan for next issue, X-Men number 14, reads Truth. So I think we're going to get Genesis's side of the story, how she became Annihilation. Thanks everybody for listening. I'm Dave. You can find ways to support Comic Book Herald and Krakin Krakoa over at patreon.com/Comic Book Herald for as little as $1 a month. You can help me out a great deal and also get some cool benefits, like you can get all these Krakin Krakoas as podcasts. I will release them in pod exclusively on the Patreon channel for every single review, and a whole bunch of other things like direct access to questions, priority reading list requests, etc., all the fun stuff I'm doing over on Comic Book Herald. Thanks in particular to the mysterious benefactors tier: Ron Paul Kirkley, Jesse W., Professor Pride, Steve Brennan, Cole Weathers, Martin Lopez, Chris Isidro, Brent Bowser, and Professor X3769. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald on social. Look for the best comics ever and My Marvelous Year podcast for more. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.